Hi guys, welcome. Stephanie here from Second Rise Sourdough. And in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to make your own sourdough starter from scratch. It's actually not as hard as you think. The method that I'm using is a little bit different in the sense that I wouldn't say that it's a super simplified method, but it's somewhere in the middle where obviously there is a little bit of measuring involved in science. But this is so that you have the least frustrating experience by using a little bit more accuracy. Let's travel into the future because what you're looking at here are two different starters that are 14 days after the day one that I started. Obviously, in this video, I'm going to walk you through step by step on how to get to this point, but I just wanted to show you what they look like. I have been seeing consecutive days of doubling and lots of bubbles. The reason why I have two jars here is because I wanted to experiment with different flours and give you options. Because if you've done any research on how to make a sourdough starter from scratch, you'll see that there are people who will just use all-purpose flour, and then some people will use a mix of whole wheat and all-purpose flour or bread flour. And the reason for this is that introducing a whole wheat flour early on can kind of speed up the fermentation process and give you almost a head start. Now, I will say that was not my experience. I found that both were very steady in terms of performing and rising. So I'm going to give you all the information and you can decide which method will work best for you and which type of flour you want to use. There is a little bit difference in terms of flavor profile. A whole wheat flour might give more of a richness in the flavor. I did find that the whole wheat flour mix would get hungrier sooner and have more of an acidic smell versus the strictly 100% all-purpose flour. Now, it might be that in your area, all-purpose flour is more accessible and more affordable. And so it really comes down to a preference and what you want to use. But with that being said, I'm going to travel to the past and show you what you need in terms of tools and materials and how you're going to start from day one on. So make sure that you watch all the way to the end. I'm going to be walking you through step by step on what you need to do for each day. My method does use a scale, and there are other people out there that don't use scales, but I will say that it is a small investment. Usually you can find one on Amazon and I'll put some links in the description, but you can find a scale for under $10 on Amazon, and it's going to save you a lot of frustration. The more accurate you are with your measuring in grams, because sometimes with cups, there's such a range in how much flour you're putting inside the cup and the water. And obviously water weighs more than flour. So I just find that using the scale is going to take out the guesswork for you, because this is the start of your sourdough journey. You know, we don't want to start in a point of being frustrated and not seeing the results that you want. And to be honest, when you start making bread, it is better to have a scale. So you may as well make the investment. Now, other than that, you really don't need much. Think of it as a science experiment. Like, it's meant to be fun. You get to observe how things are moving along. And it's really, really cool at the end of the day when you succeed and you go and you make your first loaf and you think, wow, I made this from scratch with just simply flour and water, which is just the coolest thing. So let's get to it. First, you're going to want some kind of glass jar with a loose fitting lid. These Weck jars are so great because they have a wide mouth, which makes less spilling when feeding. And then you're going to want some kind of stirring mechanism, either a spatula or these wooden bamboo sticks work so great for stirring. If not, a wooden spoon works great as well. I have two different jars because, as I mentioned, I'm building two different starters with different flours. If you're going to use an all-purpose flour, you want to make sure that it's unbleached. I'm using an organic all-purpose flour. Now, for my starter that is made of 50% all-purpose flour and 50% whole wheat flour, what I'm doing is I'm creating a separate jar with ready-made mixed food. It's just going to make my feeding that much easier. So I'm going to do 200 grams of all-purpose flour and then 200 grams of whole wheat flour, and I'm going to mix that up really well so that everything is incorporated, so that when I go to do my feedings, I can just scoop it out and it's already going to have that mixed flour. Let's start with day one feeding. So add your jar on the scale. You're going to put 50 grams of filtered room temperature water, And then to the water, you're going to add 50 grams of the flour that you chose. Now you're going to grab the tool that you're using to mix, and you're going to start stirring and make sure that everything is incorporated really well. It's going to be thick, so don't worry. It's going to resemble almost like a thick pancake batter. That's totally normal. Don't add any more water. So make sure that everything is incorporated really well. And this is why I like having a little silicone spatula, is you can push down all those little dry flour bits that get caught around the edges of the jar so that you can really see that starting point line. You see here I'm wrapping an elastic band around and putting it at my starting point. Another option is that you can use a dry erase marker and just draw a little line again where that starting point is. Add your lid back on and make sure that you store it somewhere where it's not in direct sunlight. Okay, this is the really important part, and it might be different from what you've seen online, but on day 2, you are not going to feed your starter at all. This step is going to help create a stronger foundation for your starter for days to come. All I want you to do on this day is to take a peek to see how it's doing. You might notice that it's going to have a really strong acidic smell and become really runny, and that's really normal. If you see any type of water separation, then you can just give it a quick stir and put the lid back on, and that's it. Okay, now that we're back on day 3, you can see that on the top there was a bit of grayness to it. It's very runny, it has a strong smell, all very normal. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to pour everything out completely into a bowl, and then I gave my jar a really good clean. I just find that this helps eliminate having crusty bits and contamination. So now that I have a clean jar, I'm gonna pour back into my jar 25 grams of the starter. And then to that 25 grams, I'm going to be adding 50 grams of flour. So I'm doing a 1-2-2 ratio. So 25 grams of starter to 50 grams of flour. And then I'm going to add in 50 grams of, again, room temperature filtered water. And then similar to day 1, we're going to mix and stir and make sure that everything is incorporated really well. I'll take my spatula again and then scrape down the sides of the jar, just again to make sure that I can see exactly where that starting line is. Put the lid back on loosely. I'm going to add my elastic band so that I can see my starting point, or again, you can do a dry erase marker and mark a line. On day 3, you might see something really exciting where your starter has doubled in size, and we call this in the sourdough world a false rise. And this is an initial burst of bubbles that comes from early bacteria that create gas quickly. So it's really important to not compare the following days to that day 3 because you might not see that type of rise following. And now we're going to repeat the same thing that we did on day 3. I'm taking everything out of my jar and giving it a good clean. Another option is that if you have a second clean jar, you can just pour directly into that clean jar. I don't have one right now, so I'm pouring everything out into the bowl, giving my jar a clean, and then pouring 25 grams back into my jar. Once my flour is added, then I'm going to add 50 grams of room temperature filtered water. And then again, you're going to give everything a really good mix. Make sure that everything is incorporated really well. Scrape down the sides. I do recommend trying to feed your starter around the same time every day. It just really helps for consistency and routine, which a starter really thrives off of. Once you're done, you're going to put your elastic on or mark it with your dry erase marker, put your lid on, and then store it on your counter until the next feeding. Okay, so from day 4 to day 7, you might not see a whole lot of activity, but after day 7, you might start to see this, which is a lot of bubbles on the top and the sides. I did see a double in size, as you can see where I marked the elastic. These are really great signs. This is by day 10, where I'm seeing 3 consecutive days of doubling, really great bubbles on the top and around the sides. It has a very pleasant yeasty smell. It doesn't smell bad at all. You're going to see if you start to tilt your jar, it will kind of pull from the sides. And then this is just to show the whole wheat flour. Obviously, I'm using a different jar where it's wider, but again, good doubling in size, lots of really great bubbles all around. If your starter isn't bubbly or rising yet, I would just continue with the same feeding schedule, 25 grams of sourdough starter, 50 grams of water, and 50 grams of flour. Every starter might behave differently based off of where you are in terms of environment. And that's something else to consider, is that if you keep your house very cold, it's going to be harder for your starter to get going. But hopefully by the end of this, you have a very bubbly, happy sourdough starter and you are ready to make your first ever loaf of bread with your brand new sourdough starter that you made yourself from scratch. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I hope that you found this video useful.